My parents left me nothing, then begged when I said no. My name is Jovi, I'm 32, and for most of my adult life, I believed I was the golden child, the daughter who kept our family from falling apart while my younger sister Bree bounced from one disaster to the next. I was the steady one, the reliable one. While Bree was posting TikTok videos and chasing influencer dreams in Los Angeles, I stayed put in Denver, worked my way up to regional manager at a logistics company, and quietly became my parents' financial lifeline. When Mom and Dad's restaurant, Murphy's Diner, a little place they'd run for 20 years, started struggling after the pandemic, I was the one who stepped in. The lease payments? I covered them when business was slow. The new freezer unit when theirs died in July? My credit card. When Dad had his heart attack last spring and they couldn't afford the co-pays for his cardiac rehab, I sent them $2,000 without being asked. When their Honda Civic finally gave out, I helped with the down payment on a used Toyota Camry. I never made a big deal about it. That's just what family does, right? You help each other. You don't keep score. You certainly don't expect a parade every time you write a check or wire money through Zelle. I figured my parents knew what I was doing for them, even if they didn't say it out loud. Actions speak louder than words, Mom always used to tell me when I was little. I thought mine were screaming. Bree, meanwhile, lived in a studio apartment in West Hollywood, working part-time at a juice bar and calling herself a content creator. Her idea of helping the family was posting throwback photos of Murphy's Diner on Instagram with captions like, "So grateful for these two angels who taught me everything about hard work, red heart, #blessed, #family first." The irony wasn't lost on me that she got more likes for those posts than I got thank yous for paying their bills. But I wasn't bitter. At least, I told myself I wasn't. Bree was the creative one, the free spirit. I was the practical one. We each had our roles, and mine happened to involve a steady paycheck and a sense of responsibility that ran so deep it felt like DNA. When Mom mentioned over Sunday dinner that the roof needed repairs, I was already mentally calculating how much I could spare from my savings. When Dad's arthritis got so bad he couldn't lift the heavy crates of supplies for the diner, I spent my weekends there, helping him reorganize the storage room and carrying cases of Coca-Cola like I was training for CrossFit. My friends thought I was crazy. "You're enabling them," my college roommate Amanda would say whenever I canceled plans because my parents needed help. "They're adults, Jovi. They can figure it out." But she didn't understand. These weren't just my parents. They were good people who'd worked hard their whole lives, who'd raised 2 daughters and never asked for handouts. If they needed help now, when Dad's heart wasn't what it used to be and the restaurant industry was brutal, then helping them wasn't enabling. It was love. At least, that's what I believed until I found the will. It happened on a Tuesday in October, one of those crisp Denver days when the mountains look close enough to touch. I was at my parents' house in Lakewood, helping Dad digitize old paperwork because Mom had been after him for months to get their affairs organized. "We're not getting any younger," she'd say, which always made me uncomfortable, but I understood the importance of having everything in order. I sat at their kitchen table with stacks of documents, my laptop, and a scanner I'd brought over, methodically working through decades of receipts, insurance policies, and bank statements. Dad was in the living room watching the Broncos highlights, occasionally calling out questions like, "Do we need to keep the warranty for the microwave we threw out 3 years ago?" Mom was at the diner, handling the lunch rush. That's when I found it. Tucked between their homeowner's insurance policy and a folder full of medical bills was a manila envelope labeled, "Estate Planning Documents Confidential." My hand hovered over it for a moment. I'm not a snooper, never have been. I don't read other people's texts or go through their drawers. But something about that envelope made my stomach flutter with unease. Maybe it was the formal way it was labeled, or maybe it was some instinct I couldn't name. I opened it. The will was surprisingly simple, just 4 pages of legal language that I had to read twice to fully understand. Then my world tilted sideways. Everything, the house in Lakewood that I'd helped with mortgage payments for 3 years, the diner that I'd kept afloat during the worst months of the pandemic, their savings account, Dad's life insurance policy, even Mom's jewelry, all of it was going to Bree. My name appeared exactly once, in a paragraph that felt like a consolation prize. "To our beloved daughter Jovi, we leave our eternal love and gratitude for her constant support and devotion to this family." Love and gratitude. That was it. That was my inheritance for 5 years of sacrifice, for choosing to stay in Denver instead of taking that job offer in Seattle, for spending my savings on their emergencies instead of the down payment on my own house. Love and gratitude, while Bree, who hadn't sent them so much as a birthday card on time in 3 years, got everything tangible they owned. I sat there staring at the papers, my hands trembling. The most devastating part wasn't even what I wasn't getting. It was the realization that they'd planned this, discussed this, sat down with a lawyer and deliberately decided that my years of support earned me nothing but a pat on the head while Bree's benign neglect somehow made her worthy of their entire legacy. "How's it going in there?" Dad called from the living room. I looked up, the will still in my hands, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Finally I managed, "Dad, did you mean for me to see this?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the shuffle of his slippers on the hardwood floor, and Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway. His eyes went to the papers in my hands, and his face changed, not guilty, not apologetic, just tired. "Jovi," he said, and I could already hear the dismissal in his voice. "Why?" I whispered. He sighed, that same sigh I'd heard my whole childhood whenever I asked questions he didn't want to answer. "You don't understand. You've got your life together. You've got a good job, your own place. Bree, she's going to need help." And there it was. The truth I'd been too blind to see. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the will across the room or demand explanations. I simply folded the papers, placed them back in the envelope, and said, "I need to go." Dad stepped aside as I gathered my things. "Jovi, we can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I said quietly. "You've made your decision." I drove home in a daze, my Honda Accord feeling like it was floating instead of driving. By the time I reached my apartment in Capitol Hill, the shock had worn off and something colder had settled in its place. Not anger, not yet, but a crystal clear understanding that I'd been playing a game where only I didn't know the rules. For the next 2 weeks, I went silent. No Sunday dinners at their house. No calls to check if they needed anything. No automatic Venmo transfers for groceries or utilities. I didn't block their numbers or make dramatic announcements. I just stopped. For the first time in 5 years, I put myself first. The silence from their end was deafening. No concerned calls asking why I hadn't shown up for Sunday dinner. No texts wondering if I was okay. Nothing. It was as if my absence was so normal, so expected, that they didn't even notice I was gone. That realization hurt more than the will itself. I kept busy. I deep cleaned my apartment, organized my closet, took long walks around Cheeseman Park, and tried to imagine what my life might look like if I stopped being the family ATM. I calculated how much money I'd spent on them over the years, not to be petty, but to understand the scope of what I'd given up. The number made me nauseous. I could have had a down payment on a house, a new car, a vacation to Europe. Instead, I had love and gratitude. My phone stayed quiet until day 15, when a text finally came through. It was from Mom. "Hi honey, the furnace is making that weird noise again. Could you take a look before it gets too cold? Thanks. Red heart." I stared at the message for a long time. Not a single word about my absence. Not even a "how are you?" Just an assumption that I would drop everything and come running with a toolbox and a smile, pretending I'd never seen that will, never learned that I was worth nothing to them beyond my usefulness. I typed back, "You'll need to call a repairman." Her response came immediately, "What do you mean? Can't you just swing by?" No. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Is everything okay?" I almost laughed. Everything was not okay. Everything had been not okay for a long time, but I'd been too busy being the good daughter to notice. "I'm fine," I texted back. "Just busy with my own life." The next message came from Dad an hour later. "Jovi, don't be dramatic. We just figured you didn't need anything from the will since you're doing so well for yourself." Dramatic. There it was, the word they used whenever I had feelings they didn't want to deal with. The word that had trained me, over years, to swallow my disappointment and keep smiling. But I wasn't swallowing anything anymore. The intervention came 3 days later, on a Saturday morning when I was finally starting to enjoy my newfound freedom. I'd slept in, made pancakes from scratch, and was planning to spend the day reading a novel I'd bought months ago but never had time for. Then my phone rang. It was Bree, calling from Los Angeles with that breathless, slightly accusatory tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "Jovi, what the hell is going on? Mom and Dad are freaking out. They say you won't help with anything anymore and you're being weird about money. I'm not being weird about anything, I said calmly. I'm just not paying their bills anymore. But that's your thing, she said, and I could practically hear her confusion through the phone. You're the responsible one. You handle all that stuff. Not anymore. Why? What happened? For a moment, I considered telling her about the will, about discovering that she was set to inherit everything while I got a participation trophy. But what was the point? She'd probably just say what Dad had said, that I didn't need their money, that I was being dramatic. I'm tired, Bree. I'm tired of being the only one who takes care of them. I take care of them too, she protested. I visit whenever I can, I call them. When's the last time you sent them money? Silence. When's the last time you helped with a repair, or drove Dad to a doctor's appointment, or stayed up all night on the phone with their insurance company? More silence. That's what I thought. Jovi, I can't afford to help them the way you do. You know that. You make way more money than me. And there it was, the assumption that had governed our family dynamics for years. Because I'd been responsible, because I'd worked hard and saved money, I was somehow obligated to share it. Because Bree had chosen a different path, she was exempt from the same expectations. Figure it out, I said. I'm done. I hung up before she could respond, but I knew it wouldn't end there. The family cavalry was already mobilizing. They showed up at my apartment building that afternoon, all three of them, like some twisted version of an intervention. My doorman called up, sounding apologetic. Miss Rodriguez, there are some people downstairs saying they're your family. They're persistent. I looked out my window and saw them huddled on the sidewalk, Mom in her church coat looking fragile and wounded, Dad pacing like he was preparing for battle, and Bree checking her phone with that impatient expression she wore whenever she was somewhere she didn't want to be. I could have stayed upstairs. Could have told the doorman I wasn't available and let them stand there until they got tired and went home. But I was done hiding, done avoiding confrontations that needed to happen. I went downstairs. Jovi, Mom started the moment I stepped outside, her voice already trembling with practiced emotion. Sweetheart, we need to talk. This has gone on long enough. You're right, I said. It has. Dad stepped forward, his jaw set in that stubborn way that meant he was about to lecture me. We didn't raise you to abandon family when things get difficult. No, I agreed. You raised me to be useful. And now that I'm not being useful anymore, you're panicking. That's not true, Mom whispered, but her eyes couldn't quite meet mine. I looked at Bree, who was standing slightly apart from them, arms crossed. Did you tell them why I'm upset? She shifted uncomfortably. I told them you were stressed about work or something. Of course she had. Even now, even with the truth laid out in front of them, they were all choosing willful ignorance over accountability. I found the will, I said simply. The silence that followed was profound. Mom's face crumpled. Dad's shoulders sagged. Bree looked confused for about 3 seconds before understanding dawned, and then she had the grace to look embarrassed. Jovi, Dad said carefully, we can explain. Can you? I interrupted. Can you explain why the daughter who supported you financially for 5 years gets nothing but a thank you note while the one who's contributed nothing gets everything? It's not that simple, Mom said, tears starting to flow. Bree needs more help. You're established, you're successful. Because I worked for it. Because I made sacrifices. Because I chose responsibility over fun. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you think my success just happened? Do you think it was easy staying in Denver instead of taking that job in Seattle because I knew you needed me here? We never asked you to do that, Dad said defensively. You didn't have to ask. I saw you struggling and I helped because I thought that's what family meant. But it turns out family only flows one direction in this house. Bree finally spoke up, her voice small. I didn't know about the will. I looked at her, really looked at her. At 28, she was still beautiful in that effortless way that had always made things easier for her. People wanted to help Bree, wanted to take care of her, wanted to solve her problems. Meanwhile, I'd been solving everyone else's problems for so long that they'd forgotten I might have any of my own. It doesn't matter if you knew, I said. What matters is that they decided years ago that your potential need was more important than my actual sacrifice. But you don't need the money, Mom said desperately. You have a good job, Your own place. That's not the point. The words exploded out of me. The point is that you erased me. The point is that you took 5 years of support and love and sacrifice and decided it was worth exactly nothing. You reduced me to a source of income and then acted surprised when I stopped providing it. Dad's face was getting red, a sure sign his temper was rising. You're being selfish, Jovi. This family has always taken care of each other. No, I cut him off. I've taken care of this family. There's a difference. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling through years of transfers. Do you want to know how much I've spent on you too? $18,000 over 5 years. Rent, groceries, car repairs, medical bills, equipment for the diner. $18,000 of my own money while I lived in a studio apartment and drove a 10-year-old car. Mom was crying harder now. We never asked for all that. You didn't have to ask. I gave it freely because I loved you and I thought you loved me back. But love isn't supposed to be conditional on usefulness. It's not, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then prove it. Show me one thing, one single thing, you've done for me in the past 5 years that wasn't because I was helpful to you. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Bree spoke. This is fucked up, she said quietly. This whole situation is fucked up. For once, we all agreed on something. I thought the confrontation would end it. I thought maybe, finally, they'd understand why I was hurt and we could find a way forward. Instead, they decided to take the fight public. It started with a Facebook post from Mom 2 days later. Sometimes the children you love most are the ones who hurt you deepest. Praying for wisdom and healing in our family. Folded hands, broken heart. The comments came pouring in from her church friends, neighbors, and distant relatives. So sorry you're going through this. Some kids just don't appreciate their parents. We raised ours better than that. Each comment was a tiny knife, especially because Mom was liking every single one. Dad joined in with a post of his own, more direct, worked hard my whole life to provide for my family. Thought I raised my daughters to take care of each other and their parents when we got older. Guess I was wrong about one of them. But it was Bree's Instagram story that really got to me. A photo of her hugging our parents outside Murphy's diner, captioned, "Family isn't always easy, but real ones don't abandon ship when things get tough. Love you guys, red heart, #blessed, #family, #loyalty." They were painting me as the villain in their story, the ungrateful daughter who'd turned her back on her loving parents. And the worst part was, people were buying it. My own cousins were sharing sympathetic comments, former high school classmates were weighing in with their opinions about family loyalty. I was being judged by people who knew nothing about the situation except the version my parents had chosen to share. I stayed quiet for 3 days, watching the narrative form around me. Then I got a private message that broke my resolve. It was from my mom's best friend Janet, who'd known me since I was 5 years old. "Jovi, I don't know what's going on between you and your parents, but this isn't like you. Your mother is heartbroken. Whatever disagreement you're having, family is more important than pride. You need to apologize and make this right." That's when I realized the depth of their manipulation. They weren't just trying to guilt me back into compliance. They were systematically destroying my reputation to isolate me, to make me so desperate for acceptance that I'd come crawling back on their terms. I wasn't going to let that happen. That night, I wrote my own post. Not emotional, not defensive, just the facts. I've stayed quiet while my family has made this private matter public, but I think it's time for some context. For the past 5 years, I've financially supported my parents while my sister contributed nothing. I've paid for rent, groceries, medical bills, car repairs, and business expenses. I did this out of love, never asking for recognition or repayment. Recently, I discovered that I've been written out of their will entirely, while my sister, who has never provided financial support, will inherit everything. When I decided to stop funding their lifestyle, they labeled me ungrateful and selfish. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but for clarity. I'm done being used, and I'm done being shamed for protecting myself. I hit post, and immediately felt lighter, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for years. The response was immediate and divided. Some people supported me, sharing their own stories of being the family's financial backbone. Others criticized me for airing dirty laundry and violating the sacred code of family privacy. But the most telling responses came from my family. Bree commented within minutes, "There are always two sides to every story. Some people just can't handle not being the center of attention." Mom's response was a new post, "When your own child lies about you on social media, you know you failed somewhere. Heartbroken doesn't even begin to cover it." They weren't interested in truth or reconciliation. They were interested in winning, and they'd burn every bridge to do it. That's when I knew there was no going back. The final break came in the form of a certified letter that arrived on a Thursday morning in November. I almost didn't sign for it, but something told me I needed to see what they had to say. The letter was from their lawyer. Apparently they'd hired legal representation to handle their family drama. It was a formal cease and desist, demanding that I stop spreading false and defamatory statements about them on social media and threatening legal action if I didn't publicly apologize and retract my Facebook post within 7 days. I sat in my kitchen, coffee growing cold, staring at the legal letterhead. They were actually threatening to sue me for telling the truth about my own experience. They'd rather destroy me completely than admit they'd treated me badly. That's when I finally understood, this was never about money or wills or fairness. This was about control. For years, they'd controlled the narrative that I was the responsible one, the helpful one, the daughter who existed to solve their problems. When I stepped out of that role, I became a threat to the story they'd built about themselves as loving parents who deserved support. They couldn't allow me to exist outside their narrative because it forced them to confront what they'd really been doing to me all these years. I never responded to the cease and desist. I didn't need to. Instead, I did something more powerful. I moved on. I deleted the Facebook post, not because they demanded it, but because I no longer needed external validation for my choices. I blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, and began the process of building a life that didn't revolve around their needs and demands. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I questioned everything, when the guilt they'd trained into me whispered that maybe I was being too harsh, maybe I should just call and apologize. But then I'd remember the will, remember years of taking care of people who saw my love as transaction, and the guilt would fade. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Murphy's Diner had closed. Without my financial support, they couldn't keep up with the bills. Part of me felt guilty about that, but a larger part recognized it wasn't my responsibility to keep their business afloat indefinitely. If Bree was inheriting everything, she could figure out how to manage it. I used the money I'd been spending on their expenses to finally put a down payment on a house, a small ranch-style place in Littleton with a garden and a 2-car garage. When I signed the papers, I cried, but they were good tears. Relief tears. Freedom tears. The house had a doorbell that worked, locks that I controlled, and silence that belonged to me. A year later, I ran into one of Mom's church friends at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable but felt compelled to tell me that my parents had moved in with Bree in Los Angeles, that they were adjusting to life without the restaurant. "They miss you," she added pointedly, like this was information I needed to act on. "I'm sure they do," I said calmly. "They miss what I provided, not who I am." She looked shocked by my response, but I wasn't interested in performing gratitude for the crumbs of acknowledgement anymore. As I drove home to my house, my beautiful, peaceful house that nobody could take away from me, I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who believed that love meant sacrifice, that family meant obligation, that being needed was the same as being loved. I don't miss her, but I'm grateful for what she taught me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's dysfunction. Sometimes protecting your peace means disappointing people who never really saw you anyway. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you deserve, and that's okay. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to walk away from people who treat love like a transaction. I chose myself, finally and completely. And for the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. Breaking free from family dynamics that diminish you isn't selfish. It's survival. You deserve relationships built on genuine love, not convenient utility. Your peace is worth protecting, even when others call it selfishness. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is close a door that should never have been opened in the first place.